Welcome back. Well, we're nearly there, aren't we? We've got today's episodes, one on Sunday, and then our final episode will drop on Halloween itself to give us 31 Christopher Lee reviews over the course of the 31 days of Ha-LEE-ween. So to get there, we need some films today. We'll start off with 1967's The Torture Chamber of Dr. Sadism, also known as Blood Demon in America. Every film we talk on here seems to be known as Blood Something in America, or the Something Blood, or the Bloody Something, or the Blood in the Blood Blood, the Bloodiest Blood Blood, Bloody Blood and Bloody Blood meet Blood Bloods, Blood, bloody hell. So, I think the best title for this is the one it was briefly known as, and it's still the best, so I don't know why they haven't used it everywhere. The Snake Pit and the Pendulum, because there's a snake pit, and half the film was based on Pit and the Pendulum. So that works perfectly for me. The Snake Pit and the Pendulum. In terms of plot, we start with what feels like the end of one of these films, where Christopher Lee, for it is he, has been accosted for his terrible crimes. We're not told quite what, and is told, well, we're going to kill you, of course. But before we do that, we're going to put this mask on you, which is going to be rather painful, for it's one of those masks that Barbara Steele has to wear in uh, Black Sunday, with the spikes on the inside. So right on the face. Oh, and then we're going to quarter you. So we're going to tie your limbs up to four horses and set them off in opposite directions. And those four directions are where your limbs are going to go. So enjoy. Christopher Lee says, okay, but I will have my revenge. And I don't mean from beyond the grave. I mean, I will be back and I will have my revenge, specifically me. Cut to 35 years later, which is a bit of an odd time, isn't it? Doesn't feel like long enough for folklore to have sunk in, but it's also too long for things to be fresh in the memory. But 35 years later, our party of main actors for this film, Roger, a young for these films, he's about 58, lawyer, and he's looking after the affairs of a baroness who's told she's going to inherit a castle in this local vicinity. Roger also wants to investigate something independently because he believes this is the region where he's from, and he's supposed to be about 35 years. And remember, something terrible happened here about 35 years ago. I'm sure that won't tie in any way, shape, or form. The Baroness wants to go to her new place and take her servant. And along the way, they find a priest who's definitely not a thief. Um, but 25 times they allude to the fact that, these kind of skills you have would also be perfectly useful for a thief to have, Father. He says, well, I'm definitely not a priest, a thief. Shut up. So he's a thief. So, when they go to this castle that the young Baroness is going to inherit, it's been burnt down, sabotage. And our young lawyer says, well, wait a minute, I was told this is where you were supposed to come. It looks like we've been set up. But we should also look into this other place because turns out that this signet that I've been carrying all these years, that's also the mark of this Baron that everybody talks about round here, but nobody really talks about because, we've been told if you talk about him, his name is Death. So apparently he lived in a place called Blood Castle. It sounds nice, so we should probably go check that out while we're here. So let's do that. So after finding the Baroness's castle burnt down, our lovely little party go to Blood Castle, as you do, as you do. Let's go to Blood Castle. It's a lovely day out. So they go to Blood Castle, and en route, they travel through this forest where corpses dangle from trees more freely than leaves. It's a rather wonderful set piece with absolutely loads of corpses all over the place dangling. Some of them are skeletons, some of them are fresh corpses. It's quite a haunting image, to be honest, and they've not cheapened out. They've gone for quite a lot of bodies being hung from these branches. The young ladies in the party, so the Baroness and her servant, are kidnapped by this character who's been hanging around the periphery of the film. And when the lawyer, Roger, and the priest thief go and investigate, yes, the girls have been taken to Blood Castle, which turns out isn't that nice a place after all. Who knew Blood Castle wouldn't be a nice place? And it's being run by this servant of Count Regula. So we weren't told it earlier on, but Count Regula, Christopher Lee's character from the start of the film, his name is Count Regula. That was very imaginative, wasn't it? Count Dracula, what should we call him in this one? Oh, Count Regula, that'll do. And he was trying to achieve immortality by sacrificing 12 virgins. However, the 12th woman escaped and broke her vow of chastity and had a child. That is dun, 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 the Baroness. So maybe we were expecting it to be the lawyer. No, it's actually the Baroness. So what's the lawyer got to do with it? Why has he got this signet that's been passed down to him? Why has he been summoned? Well, his father was the sheriff of the region, essentially, who tracked down and killed Christopher Lee. So he was the magistrate, if you will, who caused Christopher Lee to die. So the Igor character, if you like, who's been running affairs and popping up in the periphery of the film, tells us that the Master is going to be returning. And sure enough, Christopher Lee is back. A few drops of this green strange looking liquids brings him back to life in a rather fun over the top scientific session. And from there, it devolves into very Edgar Allan Poe like events, including, as mentioned at the start, a whole section that is pitting the pendulum with nothing else but pitting the pendulum. But there's snake pits galore, there's some wonderful booby traps, there's some lovely set pieces, and there's some great sets in this. So that's really about as far as I want to take the plot. You can probably piece it in from there that he's obviously got them together because this is going to be his ultimate revenge on the children of those that wronged him, and he's going to try and recreate his immortality, blah 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 blah. So it's not really a twist kind of film where I can ruin much for you anyway, but I actually think it's really worth seeing. The first 25, 30 minutes, bit of a slog. Bit of a slog, but if you stick with it, you're rewarded with some fantastic imagery, some wonderful sets, a lovely performance from Christopher Lee, who's clearly digging it and thinking, this is one of the good ones in Germany for a change. I'm going to give this a bit of a go. I'm going to try here because he's given it his all. Again, the lead actor is 20 years too old, but that's always the case for these young horror leads, isn't it? And yeah, some lovely performances all around. I'm not sure there's anything great about the film, but it's just a nice surprise. It's one of those kind of tucked away in the discography kind of things. And again, the good news, like a couple of ones the other day, and one of the reasons I don't want to flash forwards in terms of the plot too much, is that the whole film is going to be in the comment section below for you to watch. So why don't you tell me what you think after you watch it, because it is indeed recommended. So that's The Torture Chamber of Dr. Sadism, or The Snake Pit and the Pendulum. Now, I mentioned the mask that Christopher Lee's character at the start of that film reminds me of Barbara Steele's in Black Sunday, directed by the great Mario Bava. Well, the year after that film, Mario Bava directed Hercules in the Haunted World with Reg Park and Christopher Lee. Um, Directed by Christopher Lee a couple of times, including like The Whip and The Body and whatnot. But this film is one of a kind of cycle of Hercules movies that were made specifically starring Reg Park. But even inside that, they weren't from the same studio, they weren't from the same directors. It was really just the casting of Reg Park that linked them. Because obviously, Hercules has been out of copyright for a little while, being, an ancient myth. So Reg Park kind of made five Hercules films which weren't connected. But this one does use a couple of sets from previous ones. But the star of this film isn't Reg Park. The star of this film isn't even Christopher Lee. The star of this film is Mario Bava. If you're someone who's only seen his horror films, then yeah, I'll give you the plot synopsis and whatnot, but really, you don't need much. Hercules and his friend, now which friend was it? Theseus? Um, Hercules, his girlfriend is essentially under some kind of mind control, and he's told you need to go to Hades and get the magic apple and conquer Jupiter and do the do and blah blah blah, and only then shall you be reunited with your true love, blah blah blah. Christopher Lee is essentially the villain of the piece. Can you imagine? Who is the uncle of Hercules' Lady Love, but the Lady Love isn't just no normal chick. She is the princess of the kingdom and should now be queen. But Christopher Lee doesn't want her to be because he's regent, so he's ruling in her stead. And guess what he's chasing in this film? Immortality. So two films in a row with Bava elements, and two films in a row where Christopher Lee achieves or tries to achieve immortality. Hercules goes to Hades with his friend Theseus, and they meet other parts of the Greek mythology, rock monsters and whatnot. I don't think I even need to go into the plot for this one because for even from my limited knowledge of Greek mythology, this is just completely making up as it goes along, where it's like they vaguely know some names and they think, well, that'll do. We'll just call this person Persephone, even though that doesn't tie up with actual Persephone from mythology and whatnot. Doesn't matter if this is uh, Jupiter's daughter and this is Neptune's daughter. Doesn't matter, right? So nobody cares in terms of the plot. It's really an exercise in getting to see Mario Bava do his thing. So on their journey to Hades, which of course is a rather tumultuous affair, the night sky turns all sorts of fantastical colors and starts to have clouds moving in the most unreal, uncanny fashion. Mario Bava's having a ball shooting that. When they get to Hades itself, it's like our world, so it's very cavernous, but with some very unusual lighting. So, or in Mario Bava's case, usual lighting. So purples and greens coming out of nowhere to give it a very unusual look, which is just pure Bava. So if you're someone again who only knows his horror output from the 60s or 70s, then you really owe it to yourself to check out this film. Again, the good news is it is in its entirety in the comment section below. Christopher Lee's villain, he's very standard. He's dubbed, which always takes away a big part of Christopher Lee's performance to give him this American accent. All the performances are perfunctory at best. Christopher Lee, you can tell, is doing a lot more with his face, but robbed of his voice is to rob a lot of the power from the character. So he comes across as quite wimpy without his rich baritone that Christopher Lee has, because he's given quite a light voice, a light tenor voice, which doesn't work. Again, if I go into too much of the plot for this one, it's just vague Greek mythology stuff that, believe me, you don't care about. In terms of the structure of the film, it's all very tight. It's a good adventure film. The designs of some of the creatures could have used a boost. Ray Harryhausen, this is not. But yeah, it's a solid adventure film made entirely watchable by Mario Bava. So if you watch this for one reason and one reason only, even though this is Ha-LEE-ween, make it for Mario. Make it for Mario because it makes it. It absolutely makes it. Next film this time is going to be from this rather behemoth set that came out, what, around 10, 15 years ago now. We're going to be talking from 1979, we will be doing 1941 with a rather insane cast, including John Belushi, who they're clearly pushing here as the star. Uh, Quote from Spielberg here. I often describe 1941 as having your head stuck in a pinball machine while somebody is hitting tilt over and over again. Hmm. Spielberg directs this film in 1979, after Close Encounters and after Jaws. So two, not just big films, but two of the biggest films ever made at that point. And he's kind of untouchable. So he's given carte blanche. So he decides to do a script that originally had been written in a serious fashion about the post-bombing of Pearl Harbor events in America, where they were worried about Japanese invasion, and then combine it with some other things that were happening in America at the time, like the Zoot Suit Wars, where young men were wearing zoot suits and fighting with sailors, and the sailors were, again, we don't need to go into the whole event. Anyway, so it takes three or four different stories and combines them into this epic. And when I say epic, Spielberg went back to the 2 hour theatrical cut and put an extra half hour in for this Blu-ray. So it's 2.5 hours long. I won't do a plot synopsis for this because you can't. There are dozens and dozens of either stories or sub-stories and plots and subplots. Basically, your main ones are there's a dance contest that a non-soldier is trying to win so he can get to Hollywood. Belushi is a kind of renegade pilot who films most of the scenes in isolation because Belushi was coked out his nut, can you believe it? And was improvising so much that to have him with other actors was kind of throwing things off, so they just let him do his own thing. Um, Dan Aykroyd and his crew readying the coastline for defense, including a house husband played by Ned Beatty. Um, and then Toshiro Mifune for It Is He and Christopher Lee, right, as a double act on a German U-boat that the Japanese are renting for the month to see how they like it, pretty much. Right. So the film is described variously as a tribute to war movies, a kind of loving parody of war movies, which you can see in certain parts, but also as a bit of a screwball comedy, which you can see in parts. But really, it's a tribute to how much of a superstar Steven Spielberg was at this point in the late 70s, because this film is an absolute mess. Adding in an extra half hour to the version I remember does not help it one bit. It's just even more bloated, even more excessive, even more over the top. There are huge set pieces here. Um, Bomber planes landing on Sunset Strip and a Ferris wheel becoming detached after being shot at by U-boats and becoming detached and going flying into the sea, and a house that's on a cliff top collapsing. They did for real. They just destroyed an actual house. There are far too many plots for it to be cohesive. There are far too many characters for you to care about any of them. And really, it needs to be scaled back into probably two films, which might have been slightly compelling. One is a tribute to the kind of Elvis, J Blues kind of war movie. You could do that with the story of the young guy that wants to be a dancer and win the competition to essentially date Betty Grable, that kind of thing. That could have been a fun tribute to the fluffier side of the war movie. And then there could be a proper Christopher Lee speaking German, Toshiro Mifune speaking Japanese, collaboration with those two in a much more serious war film, plotting an invasion of California. Instead, they just go for the farcical um, take on everything. Although I do admire Toshiro Mifune and Christopher Lee clearly decided to play it entirely straight. Everybody else is playing it for laughs. They're the only two who obviously decided between themselves, if we play it straight, we'll be all the funnier for doing so. Because they're all saying, well, Belushi's getting more laughs than me, so I'm going to try and one up him. So Dan Aykroyd and Belushi and John Candy, an insane cast. It's almost laughable how big this cast is. Like Mickey Rourke's in it for half a scene, and Joe Flaherty, and just superstars galore. Karen Allen's in here. Yeah, just so many actors who would go on to absolutely massive careers. But at this point, were relative unknowns or just on their way up from television, from Saturday Night Live and SCTV and whatnot. But yeah, the cast is insane. Spielberg's ego is insane to think that this was manageable. And frankly, I think his ego was still out of control in 2014 when he did this extended version because you'd think with age he would have the wisdom to say, no, no, that doesn't work. If anything, I should be trying to cut this film some more, not try and add to it. There are funny parts to it, but really, it's nightmare inducing for the last hour, especially on the extended version, because it's just full of explosions and shouting and ranting. And sorry, I've never found John Belushi as funny as most people seem to. Don't get it. I don't understand it. I've watched all the seasons of Saturday Night Live that he's on, and it just always annoys me. I just think I can constantly see him decide to try and upstage everybody he's acting with. And I can see it in every performance he ever gives. Every single one of them. So yeah. Hmm. However, there's this great myth about this film that it was Spielberg's first bomb. Pardon the pun, given there are quite a few bombs in the film. The film made $100 million on a $35 million budget, so it was a hit. It wasn't a massive hit, but it was certainly a hit. It's just that at this point, Spielberg's films were making two, $300 million, so it wasn't as big a hit. But how interesting that Spielberg, just to have a hit, was considered a massive flop. The next year, he would go on to make Raiders of the Lost Ark, so I think it all worked out rather well for Spielberg. It didn't work out too well for John Belushi, though, did it? He's only got a few years left after this. No, Blues Brothers. I do like him in Blues Brothers. It's almost like Aykroyd gets the best out of Belushi, but nobody else can, I think. So yeah, the film's just incredibly bloated, incredibly silly and over the top, but not funny silly. Just, oh, why are you doing this? This is facile. Yeah, and if anything good came out of it, it's where Spielberg meets Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale, and they went on to have the relationship where Zemeckis and Gale wrote and directed Back to the Future, and Spielberg produced that. So without this, we might not have got Back to the Future. So that's about it. That's the best thing to come from this film is Back to the Future, to be honest. So, yeah. And our last film, I don't actually have the disc for. It's next door, and I forgot to bring it. Oops. Death Train from 1995. Right, so bit of a later entry. This, strange one. It's Pierce Brosnan and it's Patrick Stewart. So if you know your timeline, it was recorded in 1992. The film was shot in 1992. Pierce Brosnan isn't quite James Bond yet, so he's a couple of years away from that. So he's not yet been cast even, but he's looking very much like GoldenEye era Pierce Brosnan. Patrick Stewart's right in the middle of his Star Trek Next Generation run though. So it's quite interesting that we've got Pierce Brosnan, who probably thinks his time is gone with the chance to be a big name because he's had Remington Steele and he's been cast as Bond for in 1986, but when Remington Steele gets renewed, he has to stand down as Bond and Timothy Dalton takes over. And he probably at this stage thinks, I'm never going to get it. So he's doing the Lawnmower Man, Mrs. Doubtfire. He's never going to be the big superstar. Little does he know his phone's going to ring about a year after this film is shot. Patrick Stewart is the head of basically he's M for the movie. He's the head of this intelligence network who deals specifically with worldwide threats, Team America kind of thing. Pierce Brosnan's his Ethan Hunt, his James Bond, his best guy, and they have a Russian general who's gone rogue and has created two nuclear weapons. One of them is on a train, and one of them is the kind of backup if the train thing doesn't work out, which obviously it's not going to work out. Otherwise, why would they need to introduce the idea of having a backup? They should have really saved that as a twist, shouldn't they? Anyway, so uh, train is hijacked in Europe, and the hijacker, played by Ted Levine, phones through the threat. The tests are done by the authorities to make sure it's legit. Sure enough, there's a nuke on this train that could take out half of Europe. Right. So Pierce Brosnan and the team go and they're going to get it sorted. Very predictable action style. There's some nice set pieces involving the train. You can tell that they kind of worked around the skeleton of an idea built around a train, which apparently came from Alistair MacLean, who wrote the Navarone films or the books that Navarone films were then based on. But you can tell also that they updated it to be the 90s. So that in the 90s, we've got that kind of Mission Impossible team style thing going on. You know, a team of, the characters, the Predator kind of thing, the Aliens format. So we do have that going on a bit here where everybody's got one-liners and whatnot. Whereas the Alistair MacLean original text, you get the impression probably relied on, as Alistair MacLean was wanting to do, more of a maverick type, just an individual guy who's maybe part of the services, but a bit of a lone wolf operating on his own to thwart evil and almost certainly fighting Germans in that script because that's all Alistair MacLean ever bloody did. So in this, the Russians are trying to bring back, or the specific Russian played by Christopher Lee is trying to bring back the Soviet Union by causing such a state of emergency in the Middle East. Believe me, I know I said Europe, but the script moves on to the Middle East. There's a train, so they'd literally take the train to the Middle East at one point. Where if he causes uncertainty in that region, in Iraq, then Russia will have to invade Iraq. And to do that, they can't just be the Boris Yeltsin pussyfoot Russians. They'll have to go back to be the good old Russians of the Cold War. Right. So that's his vague plan, and I mean very vague. But again, right at the very film's opening, we see him creating two bombs along with a nuclear scientist. And it would be much more effective if half an hour from the end, Pierce is on a train, and oh my God, how are we going to defuse this? Oh, we've done it, we've done it. Ah, you think you have done it, but you don't know about the backup bomb, comrade. That's the way it should have gone. But throughout the whole film, we're acutely aware that there's a second bomb out there. So why would you have that in the script? Why would you possibly have a second bomb in the script? If this one in the train was the only one you needed to deal with. So they constantly just go on about the one on the train. It's almost like they conveniently forget about the one that's just out there somewhere. So, it's like they've read the script in advance. So, well, we'll deal with the train because that's where we've got all the action set pieces set up, and then we'll worry about the other one later because that's very much how it plays in the film. It is actually quite fun though. I had quite a bit of fun with the film in that kind of cheesy 90s fashion, where it feels like, God, we just don't get films like this now. These cheesy films that were actually released in cinemas. Apparently in America it was made for TV, but in the UK it did come in at the cinemas. I remember the posters for it. So yeah, it's just the kind of film that you just would not get just a few years later than this. This kind of thriller, mid-range budget. These days, if it was made at all, it would be on streaming. It would definitely never be anywhere near cinemas. It's almost a relic of the Cold War itself, pretty much. And the big joys for me in it, first of all, seeing Patrick Stewart and Pierce Brosnan together as a charm. Christopher Lee gives his character a lot more dignity than the character really deserves. The character's again, being very silly and revealing far too much of his plan from the outset. But Christopher Lee gives him a quiet dignity, including that he's at the very start of the film when the two bombs are created, Christopher Lee's Russian general and a nuclear scientist are irradiated. And they've only got a few days to live because of that, because of an accident that starts the film off. And Christopher Lee plays it with this kind of sad melancholy of knowing that he's going to, hopefully in his eyes, recreate the Soviet Union, but he's not going to live to see it. And he plays that with the quiet dignity. So he's not playing a villain. He's playing it because remember, he's the hero of his own story, as though, well, I'm a true patriot and I'm going to die so that my country may live. So lovely stuff from Christopher Lee. Again, very much like 1941, he's underplaying it, almost noticing that everybody else is overplaying it. Ted Levine is off his tits in this. This is the year after Ted Levine was in Silence of the Lambs as Buffalo Bill. So, he's peak Ted Levine hamming it up as a bad guy, as the hijacker of the train with the nuke on it. Pierce Brosnan he doesn't know at this point that he's going to be Bond, but it's very much like he's auditioning for Bond anyway. Terrific to see that. It's almost a missing Bond adventure in some regards. I don't want to set that up too much because it's not got the quality of a Bond action film, but it's nice to see regardless. And what I really like too is there is a female character in it, and she does get a bit of a girl on this team of men who know how to do things when women should be in the kitchen. But at no point do they have sexual double entendres. At no point, even at the end of the film, do they just start kissing for no reason. They very much play it as her character arc is she's now accepted as a perfectly valid professional within the organization, but she does not need to get off with uh, Pierce Brosnan to be considered a fully rounded, valid character. In fact, there's no sexuality in this film whatsoever, apart from just Patrick Stewart giving off that baldy sexiness that Patrick Stewart only can do. Yeah. So yeah, recommended. So to sum up today's affairs, two of your films are going to be below, and those are Hercules and the Haunted World, which again, watch it just for Bava's visuals, and the torture chamber of Dr. Sadism. Give it half an hour, and if you're not enjoying it, I don't care. Stick with it till the end because half an hour in is pretty much where it starts to get good. And then the other two films, 1941, if it's on TV, hopefully it's the theatrical cut and you can just watch that. It's a bit more bearable. And yeah, Death Train, if you like a good cheesy 90s, I was going to say B movie, but it wasn't a movie, remember, in this country. So yeah, if you want a cheesy 90s actioner, which isn't too silly and not too offensive to the intelligence, then yeah, go for that. So, there you go. Well, my darlings, we've only got two videos left now, so I hope you've picked up a few recommendations from this series thus far. Hopefully, a couple more today. And again, go down below and you can check out Hercules and Dr. Sadism if you're stuck for a couple of Halloweeny watches, because I think both of those tick a good few boxes. So, until then, I'll see you again on Sunday with a few more treats for you. And next Friday's Halloween. So we'll come back on Halloween itself with the finale, where I've already got the films lined up for that. I know exactly what I'm doing for that last one. So which makes a change. Till then, my dears, thank you very much for watching. Comments, suggestions, complaints, stick them below, and I'll see you next time.